President, esteemed fellows and guests, thank you for inviting us to talk about our work this evening. I am Mark Anstee, and I'm a visual artist who specialises in drawings, drawing of all kinds, and together with collaborator Gabi Cowburn, I've made over 130 separate visits to the stones, and Gabi's been documenting the whole process through the seasons and in all weathers. So, how did the project begin? In 2007, I was invited by the organisation Artists in Archaeology to be an artist in residence on the Stonehenge Riverside project. Archaeologist Dr. Helen Wickstead and artist Leo Duff instigated the organisation through a shared belief that artistic process and practice might shed light on certain questions raised by the archaeological process and practice. And with this mutual inquiry binding us, half a dozen artists were let loose on the precious environs of possibly the biggest archaeological dig ever held in the Stonehenge landscape. I soon found myself working on the Great Cursus alongside Dr. Julian Thomas Fellow, and it was this experience which fostered in me a deep fascination with the wider Stonehenge landscape. I returned to the Riverside dig in 2008 to expand upon some initial ideas about how to visually represent the cursus. And in 2010, I was made a Lever Hume Artist in Residence at the University of Manchester to continue this work with Professor Thomas. In common with most of the other invited artists in archaeology, I initially shied away from taking on the Stonehenge monument itself. I think we were all a bit overawed by its charisma, its fame, and perhaps thought it too obvious or too popular as a subject for serious contemporary art. But often, whilst walking alone on the cursus, and when the dig had packed up and gone, I really was alone, apart from the Chinook helicopters, that is, the party still seemed to be going on over at the stones. So, had I dismissed this famous monument too easily? And was it now time to join the throng? The last serious drawn study of Stonehenge seems to have been undertaken by another fellow, William Stukeley, in the 1720s. So now that photography has officially replaced the need for drawing, how would simply drawing Stonehenge be a worthwhile pursuit in the 21st century? It was clear that our Stonehenge Grand Tour was to be a leap of faith. I didn't think that I could discover anything that might add to the knowledge of Stonehenge, but I believed that through close study and repeated observational drawing, I would learn something about the monument visually. As a student at Goldsmiths College in the 1980s, I spent many hours drawing in the University of London School of Anatomy, whilst junior surgeons carefully and gleefully dissected cadavers. That knowledge and experience has enabled me to draw the human form from memory. So I decided I'd apply the same discipline to the anatomy of the stones. So, rules of engagement. All my drawing projects are governed by a set of structured rules, and this project was to be no different. Gabi and I elected to undertake the project for a 12-month period, from the summer solstice 2012 to the summer solstice 2013, and we rented a house a short distance from Stonehenge. I was to draw the monument by degrees from the roped-off boundary, forming the point of view from the contemporary tourist. I was to draw no landscape beyond the immediate topography around the monument, but focus on the stones themselves. I was to represent no weather phenomena beyond the natural effects of light visible on the stones in any given hour or hours of that day. That one's much harder than it sounds. I was to draw as honestly as possible, meaning with no stylistic conceits dictated by the conventions of any particular discipline, but to trust the connection between eye and hand, and to make the best drawing I could on any day. Lastly, I was to use no colour. That's a whole different world. to draw only in tones and black on white paper. So, that's my part in all of this. Now Gabi's going to tell you about her part in the Stonehenge Grand Tour project.
Hello, I'm Gabi, and I've worked alongside Mark over the last 15 years, documenting his projects. Now, most of these have been large-scale durational drawings which have happened inside in major galleries and museums. So the Stonehenge landscape was my first experience of working on plein air. I would just like to mention that the Met Office announced that 2012 was the second wettest year on record since 1910. So the operation at Stonehenge is of course centred on tourism, and culturally it's a major destination on the modern Grand Tour. It just happens that the contemporary milords are visitors from the BRICS countries, so the rising economies of South America, Russia and Asia. Once we'd taken the decision to be tourists in our own country, we had to decide how any documentation of the project might best reflect the concept. Now, normally I've filmed Mark, I've made films, audio pieces, and dabbled in a little photography. But what was the right approach here for this particular project? Well, William Stukely showed us the way. It was in Stuart Piggott's biography that I read that Stukely's field notes from his earliest tours on horseback around the UK, and particularly to the ancient sites of Wiltshire, were, and I quote, "the journal of the ordinary educated tourist of the 18th century rather than that of the archaeologist." Now, personally, I can hear a hint of judgment in that, but personally I did think it was a perfect starting point, and in a similar fashion I decided that I'd keep a journal as an ordinary educated tourist. But because this is the 21st century, I could also post it digitally as we went along. We entered the site each day by showing our English Heritage membership cards. We asked for no privileged access, but decided that we would attend Stonehenge during opening hours, along with all of the other international tourists. And at that point, we didn't realise quite how challenging that might be. On very busy days, Stonehenge can host up to 8,000 visitors. And it has been an astonishing year. Many visitors came in sportswear, as the world's Olympians visited wearing national team colours. We've witnessed a large South African choir give an impromptu concert, and many impressive feats of dance and musicianship, and some very impressive balancing and acrobatic feats. We've seen religious visitors from Buddhist monks, Catholic nuns, and pagans of every conceivable hue, endless documentary and news crews, and one Hollywood blockbuster. It's also been a year of the onesie and the selfie. And of course, just days after the end of our Grand Tour, the A344 closed to traffic and is no more. So we witnessed the last days of tanks and military transporters hurtling past the Heelstone. Just going to read a little bit from my journal. Tuesday, the 17th of July, 2012. It's not raining. So we head up to Stonehenge and the car park is surprisingly empty, but it's still early. A group of young men, tall, 20s, amble towards the entrance booth. Two of them are wearing what I can best describe as adult baby grows. Green dragons with yellow fabric triangles chasing up their spines. One has massive, hairy yeti feet. Mark chooses a spot just where the tarmac walkway opens up into the mown grass, sits, puts his drawing board on his lap and draws. It's warm. A few crows drift about inside the rope barrier. The crowds build. The dragons have persuaded a party of girls to join them in a conga while someone films them. They hop and skip in a line around the guide rope. They look very funny. A little boy stands and grizzles as his parents take photos of the stones. "No, Max!" shouts an agitated father. A party of Chinese students come by. They cluster round Mark as he draws. They stand really close and take photos of him working. He just keeps drawing. The dragons pose with strangers for photos. It's busy now, but quite relaxed. A couple of older men, retirement-aged Chinese, stand and watch Mark work. He's had quite a few comments over the past few weeks from Chinese visitors. It seems that because he's working in ink, it's a technique they know and appreciate. One lady said to him that the sign of a master draftsman was to create 7 different tones from one single colour, and she counted 10 on his picture. It's interesting when people can tell the difference. The Chinese, or the older Chinese visitors in particular, really know how to look at a drawing. It must be part of their education system. Monday, the 23rd of July. It's a glorious day. It's sunny, warm and summery. From the tourists already here, it's clear that we're into the school holidays. The jackdaws and crows are already settled on the stones, nestling into the nooks and crannies of the sarsens. A chinook flies over, the traffic rolls by. On the tarmac walkway, a tour guide gathers his small group and launches into his own particular history of Stonehenge. He says that there's evidence of a large settlement of up to 1,000 people at Durrington Walls who suddenly left and abandoned this site. Why? His 3 reasons are: 1, disease, maybe smallpox; 2, war, a conflict between competing tribes; 3, aliens. Mark is sitting by the rope on the wide bit of the grass walkway. People are drawn to him, as always. They photograph themselves, the stones, the artist. Mark's drawing in ink. To deal with the wind, he's taken to blue tacking small metal tins to his drawing board and putting ink and water pots inside of these. It seems to be working. But it's a constant battle with the light. Blue tack won't stop that moving round. A young boy stands behind Mark with his smartphone held as high as he can reach in an attempt to get an overhead shot of the drawing. A couple stand trying to take a photo of themselves, him holding the camera outstretched in front of them. I'm sitting on a bench watching everything. Someone photographs me. Thursday, the 16th of August. The weather has confused visitors again. People's summer wardrobes are supplemented by whatever is at hand to add another layer. Mark is on the west side, getting on with an ink study. A teenager crouches down behind him to get that artist drawing Stonehenge shot. The tarmac path is particularly busy, and I'm guessing it's a cruise ship day. Caucasian people of a certain age in a certain type of loose-fitting clothing, comfortable. But amongst them all is a collection of Southeast Asian teens. I can't tell where they're from, but they don't seem animated enough to be Chinese or cool enough to be Japanese. And yes, I'm slightly appalled at myself for stereotyping in this way, but it does have some validity. There are certain national characteristics, and I know that other nations recognise them too. I was told by a fellow visitor recently that I don't seem typically English in that I'm not fat. I didn't know whether to be offended or flattered, but on very little consideration I decided to lean to the latter. Thursday, the 4th of October. Stonehenge looks spectacular today. The light is just right somehow. Yes, it's shifting because of the blown clouds, but it's golden and clean when it hits the stones, and the sarsens look magnificent. The blue stones actually look bluish. Mark is back on the bridge over the avenue today, finishing a study in ink. The woman with the goat-headed staff is here, her black velvet cloak dancing in the wind. The military jets are out. One does a celebratory roll as it flies over, to the great delight of us on the ground. People stand on the bridge craning over the rope to look at Mark's drawing and to take photos. There's a steady stream of coach parties yomping round and the usual clustering of non-payers outside the chain link fence. The roads are busy with MOD vehicles, jeeps, flatbacks carrying other motors, and a smallish tank, conspicuously loud as its caterpillar track rattles along the tarmac. A junior school party come by, girls and boys each wearing a tabard tied at the waist with a bit of string over their cagoules and anoraks. There are leaders with them, the National Trust logo printed on their jackets, and one of them hands out some wooden bows to several children designated archers. "Okay, we'd better get killing," I hear one of the leaders say, and another obligingly lays face down on the grass while small children ping rubber-suckered arrows at him. Friday, the 1st of February, 2013. The journey up to Stonehenge feels a little like traversing a war zone. Not this time because of military activity, but because of the roadworks happening around the new visitor centre build. I suppose they're doing well to keep the roads open at all, considering everything that's going on here. The route is a jumble of trenches and traffic cones, ripped tarmac and temporary traffic lights. February is introducing herself quite charmingly. The light is glorious. The sky is a polite patchwork of cloud and the temperature reasonably mild. There is, though, a sharpness in the wind, a reminder that it really still is winter. The walkways around the stone circle are half open. We could walk along the tarmac path and the path along the chain link fence to the heelstone, but the grass is out of bounds. It's still sodden from the rain and the snow melt and the most recent rain. Mark is still working on his Silver Point triathlon. The weather has been so foul of late, he's not been able to draw up here as often as he would have liked. He actually needs a little tent, one of those shelters that fishermen used to sit inside of while waiting for a bite, but I don't think English Heritage would approve. He's persevering though. A woman in a maroon raincoat stands at the end of the tarmac path with her small compact camera and says, "Oh, it's quite something, isn't it?" I'm the only person nearby, so I feel it would be rude to ignore such enthusiasm, and so I meet Jane. She's on her way to visit Wells. We have a wonderful chat, and she quotes a piece of T.S. Eliot that comes to mind as she contemplates this place and the stones and the feet of all those who've journeyed here and their desire to share in something significant or simply to honour this place. Jane says they've all come to kneel where prayer has been valid.
We continued to visit Stonehenge up until June 21st, 2013, and a little beyond so that I could complete this Silver Point drawing. I began it in March 2013 and eventually finished it 132 hours later in July. Silver Point, for anyone who doesn't know, is literally the point of a silver that leaves a mark when pulled across a surface that has some bite. I prepare paper coated with gesso. It was a technique used by many artists in the Renaissance and may seem anachronistic in the digital age, but it's perfect for slow, sensitive mark making and detail. It also has a very strong material presence, which is an important property when you're trying to distinguish a drawing from an image. To give yourself to a project over the span of a whole unbroken year allows you the luxury of time. Time to look slowly. Time to transpose these three-dimensional forms into drawings. Drawings that seek to track the process of makers who sculpted the stones, dressed the surfaces, and composed the stone circle. If to draw is to know, this is what I was attempting to do. I hoped that after a year, I might be able to commit the monument to memory and have a better understanding of the visual decisions made by the people who built it. It's true to say that I could make a pretty good fist of reproducing Stonehenge from various different angles, and could remember certain stones in a fair amount of detail. But it's also true to say that the longer I spent drawing the monument, the more I began to realise that this process could last a lifetime. As I look through the monument, I can see that the profiles of stones echo others, appearing deliberately sculpted, And I don't mean for apparent practical reasons. To me, it looks like there is a formal aesthetic judgment at play, not only as a whole structural composition, but also in the spatial relationship between the individual forms. These are the considerations of the artist. And I am, of course, studying Stonehenge through the eyes of the visual artist. My observations are based on my specific training and the expertise pertinent to my specialism. It has been a great privilege to spend so much time observing and drawing Stonehenge. And in common with my colleague archaeologists, I know I share mixed pleasure of working in the field, no matter what the seasons bring. So I'm going to leave the final word to William Stukeley on working on plein air in Wiltshire. I have never found any sultry heats, but breezes very inconvenient for drawing, as blowing the paper about. And that is the calmest weather I ever found here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure how I can follow that. What an amazing privilege to have a whole year to spend looking at something like this. I feel like I've spent several years looking at Stonehenge, but not exactly in the same way that you have. So, good evening. I'm Susan Greaney. I'm a senior properties historian at English Heritage. And since late 2009, I have been part of the team, the very small team, I hasten to add, responsible for the exhibition and the interpretation at the new Stonehenge Visitor Centre. My role in particular has been responsible for the research and for the content of what we're providing for our visitors, working alongside the object curator Sarah Lunt and also interpretation officers, firstly Emma Carver and latterly Robert Campbell. So I've been working on the project for about 4 years, not necessarily full-time over that period, but about 4 years. But obviously people at English Heritage and other people beyond, even before the days of English Heritage, have been working on various versions of this project and its previous incarnations. English Heritage has been working on delivering this project since it was set up in 1984. Alexander Keeler was actually one of the people who drew up initial plans for a museum in about 1927. He actually drew the design for the building, quite an Art Deco looking building. But unfortunately that museum was never built. It was deemed to be too large a building, too close to the stones. The current facilities that we all know, not necessarily love, were built in 1968. And only guidebooks, really, and an audio tour have been available to visitors for many, many years to help them understand the monument. There's been a growing realisation over many, many years that the facilities are inadequate, not only due to the sheer numbers of visitors, but also the lack of information and interpretation that they're given. In 1993, very famously and much repeated, the House of Commons committee condemned it as a national disgrace. Often repeated because it was true, and it's still true today. 20 years on, after several aborted schemes, setbacks, public inquiries, we have finally achieved it. Next week, the new visitor centre opens to the public for the first time. Just want to point out that the scheme that I'm going to talk to you about today, and the one that you may have heard quite a lot about already in the press, is funded almost entirely without government money. The vast majority of our funding has come from the Heritage Lottery Fund and from various donors and from fundraising, and also from the agency's own funds. Technically, the project is called the Stonehenge Environmental Improvements Programme. Sounds a bit of a mouthful, but basically that tries to get across the fact that it's not just a new visitor centre. The project is a major part of the project is the removal of the A344. You saw in Mark's photographs quite well how that horrible road with its chain link fence ran so close to the heelstone and cut off the avenue from Stonehenge itself. Thankfully now removed and now being set back to grass, the fences will be removed. This is a rather perhaps ambitious CGI, but it gives you an impression of what it might look like when the grass is gone and all the fences are down. And of course we're going to be removing the current visitor centre, visitor facilities, and removing the car park that's currently there. and constructing a visitor centre at Airman's Corner. Today I'm just going to give you a really quick behind-the-scenes overview of the work that went into developing the exhibition at Stonehenge and what it looks like, and also the opening temporary exhibition. It's a slightly whirlwind tour, because I've only got about 20-25 minutes, but I hope that it will give you a flavour of what the visitor centre looks like and what the work has been to go into that exhibition. And so when you see it for yourselves, you'll appreciate the project as a whole. Now, due to the failure of Alexander Keeler's initial plans for a museum in 1927, all of the objects that have been excavated from Stonehenge have been deposited at local museums, particularly Salisbury and South Wiltshire Museum in Salisbury. Other major collections from the World Heritage Sites are stored at Devizes in Wiltshire Museum. And we knew from the beginning of the project that English Heritage didn't have any of its own collections relating to Stonehenge, but we really wanted to display real archaeological objects from Stonehenge and from other monuments in the landscape. So we set up a partnership with the two museums, with Salisbury Museum and with Wiltshire Museum. And in effect, they have lent us the permanent collection for our exhibition at Stonehenge. In return, we have helped to fund their own redesign and redevelopment of their own prehistoric galleries. Wiltshire Museum very successfully opened their new prehistoric galleries only a few weeks ago. If you haven't been, I fully recommend a visit. They have some fantastic collections. Their collections obviously very, very strong in terms of the early Bronze Age and the antiquarian collections, particularly Richard Coltford and William Cunnington's. Salisbury Museum will be opening their new prehistoric galleries in June or July next year, and they're focusing a slightly wider story, the archaeology of Wessex, and they're also going to be featuring in quite a large way the Beaker burials, obviously the Amesbury Archer and that kind of thing. So, working with the two museums has been the bedrock, really, of developing our displays. And we've been very fortunate in working with the curators of the two museums in order to build up a really fantastic collection for our own visitor centre. We also assembled an expert panel. Some of the faces on the screen may well be familiar to you. I'm not going to go through them all. But this expert panel met with us on several occasions to help us develop the scheme, in particular coming up with ideas, themes, and telling us the latest, really. One of the major projects in the landscape has been the Stonehenge Riverside project. Sorry, that's gone forward. As Mark was discussing. And of course, most of that work hasn't been published yet, so they helped us with deciphering all of that new work. One of the things that the expert panel helped us to come up with was this lovely looking colourful table. I'm not expecting you to read it, don't worry. But in effect, this is a timeline, and it allows us to set the context of Stonehenge in prehistory. So what we did was we divided up the time of prehistory into 3 blocks. The Stonehenge World Heritage Site is inscribed for a geographic area. Many of you know the shape of the Stonehenge World Heritage Site, quite a large area around Stonehenge. But not many people know that it's also inscribed for a period of time. It's inscribed for a particular period of prehistory, 3,700 to 1,600 BC, covering the Neolithic periods and the early Bronze Age. So what we did in terms of trying to break this down to our visitors was break this into 3 very basic periods. The green is before Stonehenge, the blue is the time of Stonehenge, as in the time that Stonehenge is being built, and the bronzy orange colour is after Stonehenge was built, so it's the early Bronze Age. And really these 3 periods we've tried to reflect through all of our interpretation. The other thing that the expert panel helped us come up with was this also lovely looking table, which basically sets out the various themes that we wanted to cover in the exhibition. We decided that the major questions and themes and things we wanted to tell people about Stonehenge could be divided into 5 themes: sky, stones, landscape, people, and meaning. Actually, we lost sky at one point. This is about 5 years old, this table. We actually didn't have a separate sky theme in the end. We brought that in and had it with stones, because it's not really the sky by itself that means anything to us, it's the way that the stones are arranged to reflect alignments of the sky. One of the other major pieces of work that we did with the expert panel was work on the sequence and chronology of Stonehenge. So many of you know that earlier last year, a new paper was published in Antiquity, which set out a new chronology and new sequence for the stones of Stonehenge. And what we will be presenting to visitors is a simplified version of that new sequence. quite a lot of work had to go into discussing exactly how we were going to present that new sequence to our visitors. And these are just some visuals that help show the way that we've done that. In effect, what we've done is chosen 3 dates in prehistory when we think we know what Stonehenge looked like. We've chosen 3 dates, 3 sort of snapshot dates, at which our models and some of our films show Stonehenge. And the reason for doing this is because the sequence at Stonehenge is still very complicated, and there's lots of debate and discussion about what happens at certain stages. But at these 3 particular dates, almost everybody agrees at what Stonehenge looks like. So that's how we've presented the sequence. So this is number 1, this is 3000 BC, when the bank and ditch are first constructed, and the posts or pillars, depending on which view you subscribe to, are standing in the Aubrey holes. Then in 2500 BC, the stones in the centre arrive and set up, the sarsen stones, in their formation that we see them today, with the blue stones arranged in a double circle. And then in about 2200 BC, the blue stones are rearranged and the avenue is built. So those are our basic 3 dates that we're presenting, and these graphics are actually used to create the tactile 3D models in the exhibition. This is a plan of the visitor centre. At the top here is one pod. This is a glass pod. The actual entire building is roofed by a rectangular sweeping roof. This pod here houses the cafe and the shop, and this one here, which is a sweet chestnut pod, wooden pod, has the all-important toilets and our exhibition space. And we also have an external exhibition gallery. So in effect, about 3 or 4 years ago, we were given this rectangular space as a blank box to fill with our exhibition. This is a CGI top-down view of what the exhibition looks like. Having stood in it this morning, it does look quite like that. The different parts of the exhibition are as follows. Visitors come in here. This is a lobby area. And this here is a 360-degree film showing Stonehenge. It's designed to give the impression that you're standing within the stones. Due to the sheer amount of visitors we get at Stonehenge, over 1 million a year, we just cannot let everybody inside the stones. But the one thing that everybody wants to do is stand inside the stones. So this gives you at least some impression of what it's like to stand inside the stones in different seasons and at different times and at different points of the year. So it's quite an immersive experience. It's just a film, but it's actually based on the laser survey that we took of Stonehenge in 2011. So it's really accurate CGI. The film itself took, I think there was about 60 computers in Manchester. Took them about 2 weeks just to render one version of the film. So it's very high quality. Out here are some large message totems which give some key messages about Stonehenge. Here are some object cases which display some of the prehistoric objects from Stonehenge and the landscape. This here is our landscape wall, which is another film which shows how the landscape changes through time. And over here we have a display about the different theories and different meanings of Stonehenge. This here in the bottom corner is our temporary exhibition space. This is just another view looking the other way, just to show you that we also have some models of Stonehenge on this side, and actually on this blank wall is a timeline as well. So what I'm going to do is just quickly run through. These are some quite early visuals as to what the exhibition looks like. Here's the lobby on your way in. Here's the 360-degree film. This was created for us by a company called Centre Screen, working with an animation company called Studio Liddell. I don't know if any of you have got children or grandchildren that like Rory the Racing Car. They're the company that make programs like that, entirely CGI digital versions. And they've made our film for us, creating it using the laser scan data. These are our message totems with some key messages about people and about the stones and about the landscape. Here are our object cases, 5 of them. Here's a kind of view of what they look like. The first 3 cases focus on the time of Stonehenge, so we have approached this using major questions. So how was Stonehenge built? Who built Stonehenge? What else was going on at that time? So in the cases we have objects such as the antler picks that we used to dig the ditch, the animal bones that were placed in the ditch when it was constructed. We have objects like hammer stones that were used to shape the stones. We have a cremation burial from Stonehenge itself. We also have finds from Darrington Walls, because of course the connection to the settlement of Darrington Walls is very important. Lots of grooved ware pottery, oblique arrowheads, some really lovely finds from the excavations there. Our fourth case is dedicated to the time before Stonehenge, so we look at what the landscape looked like before, so long barrows, causewayed enclosures, what was life like in this landscape before Stonehenge was built. And our fifth case covers after Stonehenge, so the early Bronze Age, when the barrows are constructed, all of the fantastic finds from the barrows, the beaker burials, those stories. These are just some of the objects that we've got on display, I've just selected just a few of them. Top left is a beaker, and that was found in a barrow called Wilsford G54, also with the bluestone axe, which is top right. Down at the bottom are some of the chalk plaques, which are found on Kingbarrow Ridge and Pit. These are fantastically engraved and incised items dating to the late Neolithic period. And then on the bottom right we have some beads and pendants from one of the barrows on Normanton Down. So you can see that the museums have really lent us some really special objects which will be on display in the visitor centre. We've also commissioned quite a lot of new reconstructions. This is one of the reconstructions that we commissioned from Peter Lorimer, who's a reconstruction artist who works entirely digitally. He did 10 reconstructions for us, and they've been used throughout the guidebook, the exhibition, and on graphic panels in the landscape. Each of these reconstructions represents an awful lot of work, both in terms of the research and the briefing for the artist, and the actual computer graphic work itself. Here's his reconstruction of the settlement at Darrington Walls. He actually has done 3 separate ones of the settlement there, but I think this one works really well at showing sort of the mess and the middens and the archaeology of that settlement. Here's our landscape film. It doesn't actually look like that, sorry, it's a bit of a strange graphic, that one. What we've done with the landscape film is commission a company called Squint Opera to produce us a film, and basically shows the landscape changing through time. So again, in our 3 periods, before Stonehenge, the time of Stonehenge, and after Stonehenge, this is just a snapshot of what that film looks like. Again, done using CGI, and it's about 10 metres long, this film, so it's quite a large installation. And it has pop-up animations that show you different monuments in the landscape being built and being used through time. Here we have our models of Stonehenge in its different phases, the ones I explained at the beginning. Here's just actually a snapshot of one of the models. This is one of the models being brought into the office for us to approve. They've actually got the finished models have a bronze effect. They look really nice, actually. And then finally our meaning exhibit, which has some short films which cover different theories about what Stonehenge was for and how it was used. So we cover 2 past theories. We look at particularly William Stukeley and his idea that it's a Druid temple. We look at the 1970s ideas from Gerard Hawkins that it was an astronomical computer. And then we look at 2 current archaeological theories, Mike Parker Pearson's theory about it being a domain of the ancestors, and Tim Darville's theories about the healing blue stones. There's also a film there which covers the meanings of Stonehenge today. So its meanings in terms of for spiritual, pagan and Druid communities, in terms of art and inspiration, television, advertising, as a sort of, its role as an icon, really. And then outside we have an external gallery. We have a large scale-to-scale sarsen on rollers. We have the touching stones, which are a sample of sarsen and bluestone. And from January, we will be building replicas of the Neolithic houses that were excavated at Darrington Walls. We've also installed panels across the landscape, working very closely with the National Trust to put in a brand new interpretation screen across the landscape. This is the panel that's gone in at Woodhenge. And backed up with that is obviously various different pieces of interpretation. We have the audio tour, we have a family audio tour, there's downloadable apps, there's various books. We've produced a new version of the guidebook, produced by Julian Richards. We've produced this quite nice publication, which is a walker's map of the World Heritage Sites. It's based on the OS map, designed to help people when they're walking and exploring the landscape. Because really, one of the key points of this project was to try and encourage visitors to get out more into the landscape and see much more of the prehistoric monuments that are preserved in the landscape. Not just see Stonehenge in isolation, but to make them realise that it's part of a wider prehistoric complex. And finally, we have our temporary exhibition space. Now this is really exciting for us because for the first time we can put on display some objects at Stonehenge and some fantastic exhibitions and displays that we wouldn't otherwise be able to cover as part of the permanent exhibition. This is kind of fairly boring graphic, but it basically just shows you how large these cases are. We've made a space that can be adapted to any exhibition, be it graphic, object heavy, large objects, whatever we want to put in that space. And the opening exhibition, which opens next week, is called Set in Stone, ? How our ancestors saw Stonehenge. And it basically traces the history of Stonehenge. So it looks at the history of ideas about Stonehenge. So starting from medieval myths and legends about how Stonehenge was built by Merlin, by magic. It traces ideas through to Inigo Jones, how he thought it was a Roman temple. We've got books on display about how it was possibly a Danish monument, how it was built by the Phoenicians, and then it moves into the ideas of William Stukeley and John Aubrey that it was a Druid temple, and how those ideas stayed and were very pervasive for a long time. And finally, the exhibition documents are the rise of scientific archaeology and the first radiocarbon dating. Some of the objects we've got on display are very exceptional. On display at the moment is top right, John Aubrey's Monumenta Britannica on loan to us from the Bodleian Library. This is John Aubrey's collection of manuscripts and drawings of Stonehenge. We have a rather nice portrait of William Stukeley, bottom right, on loan to us from Lydiard House near Swindon. We also have some medieval manuscripts on display. We have one on display from Corpus Christi College in Cambridge, and for the last 3 months of the exhibition we'll be having this particular drawing showing Merlin putting Stonehenge up, which belongs to the British Library. So we've been very privileged in being able to obtain these loans from various lenders. And at the bottom is a replica Mycenaean dagger, one of the sort of electro-type replica from the British Museum. These were very popular in the early 20th century to replicate finds from elsewhere. And at the time, Atkinson thought that the carvings on the stones were these kind of Mycenaean daggers. When he saw the dagger carvings at Stonehenge, this is what he had in his mind when he said that he thought Stonehenge was built by a Mediterranean culture. I'm very pleased to say that the Society of Antiquities has been incredibly generous in loaning to us for the full duration of the exhibition some key objects for our display. We have got on display William Petree's survey of Stonehenge. We have Walter Charlton's book, which relates to how Stonehenge is a Danish monument. He believed it was a coronation place of Danish kings. We have William Stukeley's volume, 1740 volume, on Stonehenge, the very famous and very well-read and well-cited book on Stonehenge. We have Inigo Jones's volume, that's his stylised and restored plan of Stonehenge, bottom left. And then also we have Charles Hamilton Smith's and Samuel Rush Meyrick's fantastic 1815 book, which is the costume of the original inhabitants of the British Isles. Fantastic plates in that, including this one, which depicts Stonehenge festooned with banners ready for a Druid festival. So, amongst all the excitement, the new buildings, the exhibitions, really, I wanted to finish with a picture of Stonehenge itself, because this monument is really why all this work is going on and the project is happening. And the next part of the project, running after the opening of the visitor centre, will really make the difference to this site. Some of you will have also already seen that the road has been closed next to Stonehenge, but with the removal of the existing visitor facilities and the existing car park, that area will be completely transformed, and Stonehenge will be once again reunited with its original approach, the processional avenue. We hope that soon in the new year we're going to organise a visit for fellows. We would like to invite you to come and see the new exhibition and see the new visitor centre and see the temporary exhibition where some of the Society's objects are on display, probably somewhere around early September. So if you look out for that in your mailings, you'll be able to come along and see it and have a private tour of the exhibition space. I think that's it from me, but I'd just like to say, do come along and visit. I can show you pictures of the exhibition and I can show you pictures of what we're going to do, but nothing really prepares you for the building and the changes that have been made to that landscape. Thank you.
Thanks very much to our speakers tonight. I'm sure you'll be doing that sort of talk more than once together, and what a fascinating different view of yes, that artistic tradition, which we ended up with there. But Mark, what really struck me when our Stonehenge material was on show in America, in the making history exhibition there, the way John Lewis and I talked about it was very much in terms of the different sight lines that people have taken of it to begin to explore these different meanings, some completely fanciful, some surprisingly near a sort of truth that we've now found through modern archaeology. And I think there's the archaeologists, but also the art historians are very interested in the way those stones have been observed and looked at over the years. Gabi, all those people, I meet 3 times a week on the 11 o'clock back to Brighton. I order a few drinks, and they stare at me preparing tomorrow morning's lecture. Again, fascinating observation of actually how a changing audience sees these things, because this is what this is all about. It's about the visitor experience that Susan has just given us. And obviously at this fascinating moment when it's an ongoing process, there's still lots to do, and there'll be lots of different reactions and things will change as time goes by. So we look forward to observing all of that and enjoying it with them, as well as going on these special visits, which we all will. We have a short time for questions, and our speakers very kindly agreed to answer any questions you have. So, anybody want to raise anything from our speakers tonight? Yes.
I'd like to ask the first two speakers what difference there was between the Stonehenge baggage they brought to the project and the Stonehenge baggage they took away from it.
Anyone else? Yes.
Vincent Gore. I'm sure we're all struck by the lyrical presentation with which afternoon began. It took me back to my student days with Stuart Piggott and Richard Atkinson, digging in the mid-50s, when we experienced Stonehenge literally and every moment of the day and night. And just a very brief story to show that people take away from Stonehenge very different things. Stuart recounted how 2 learned academicians from Moscow Academy of Sciences visited Stonehenge. On the way back in their car to Malvern Hotel, they were obviously in animated discussion of what they'd seen. And Stuart leaned back and said to the interpreter, what did comrade so-and-so and comrade so-and-so really enjoy? A rather pained look came over the face of the interpreter, and he said, the public lavatories.
Someone else? Yes.
Thank you. Could I just add 2 historical points too? I used to go to Stonehenge back at the same time as Vincent, and one of my best story is this what I said is this. There were 2 Americans came up behind me, and I was showing around as we stood at the fence by the roadside, and it was on June the 22nd. And one American said, "Where are the Druids?" I won't attempt to do the accent. Where are the Druids? Where are they? And this was about 6 o'clock in the evening. There was nobody on the site. So I said, well, excuse me putting in, but there aren't Druids here most of the time. In any case, they were here yesterday. He said, what? He said, I want the Druids and I want them now. Anyway, my serious point is this. You referred to Alexander Keeler and his plans, and then you jumped to English heritage. There was a little phase in between, which I think has probably been forgotten, which is why I mentioned it, which relates to what I think is one of your biggest successes, which is bringing what I know as Devices Museum, now Wiltshire Museum and Salisbury Museum, together in cooperation. In 1962, I think it was, it may be 3, I was one of 3 representatives from the Wiltshire Archaeological Society. We met 3 representatives from the Salisbury Museum, led by 2 of our late fellows, Hugh Short and Ken Annable. And we met the instigation of a man called Harold Corey, who had a lot of money, to consider building a Stonehenge museum. And this had been prompted by the falling into disuse of Salisbury Mill, the mill in the town centre of Salisbury. And the idea was to put it there. And then we had a second meeting, because we couldn't agree on that. And we picked the site, which was in the Dry Valley, just to the northeast of Stonehenge itself. But the talks came to nothing, precisely because there was no way in which Hugh Short and Ken Annable and the societies behind them were ever going to agree in lending their material to a 3rd museum, because they realised they needed their material in order to attract people there. Nothing came of it whatsoever, but it was my first meetings 50 years ago about Stonehenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, one more, yes.
Only an anecdote.
That's why I said one more.
I had the before the card in front of me was students, that's how I got into Silbury Hill, for instance. But the story of Stonehenge is that one morning, passing across the site in summer, someone noticed a lot of naked ladies draped over the stones. And on inquiry, this was just being shot for a magazine called News of Stonehenge. Now, this did appear because Tim Dartle has a copy of it. But as students, and because Atkinson is such a collector of Stonehenge, we always tried to sort of think, how would he take it? Would he put an old raincoat on and slip down to Tiger Bay? You know, got a copy of that book. But we never, didn't have the courage to do it. But it is an entirely original use and proper one on the site.
Okay, we still only have one question at the beginning there.
Anecdote. Of course, we all have those about this monument. So, would you like to use that?
Baggage. We both obviously visited Stonehenge before. I got a photo of me in homemade hot pants as a very little girl. My grandma made them, standing on one of the fallen sarsens. And that was, we picnicked there in the early 70s. So it was it was just, a day out with the grandparents, really. But it's just, very, very famous. I mean, it's in the Muppet movie, for goodness sake. So it's just, conceptually, we wanted to go as visitors. And to not take on, obviously we've learned an awful lot about Stonehenge, being there, about all the different theories, about various historians and antiquarians that have worked on it over the years. But really we wanted to go every day as fresh as we could, to eavesdrop, to look, and to just be part of a very contemporary experience and just try to be there in the moment. I think it is big enough to take whatever anybody wants to throw at it. I think what you want it to be, it probably can be that. I think you'll probably find the evidence to support your theory. I think that's fantastic. Don't know what.
Yeah, well, I have a natural aversion to anything popular because I'm that kind of artist. That's why I spend so much time on the cursus. So my prejudices were huge, except in my narcissistic way, one of my ancestors, to my shame, or maybe to my pride, has carved the name Anstee on one of the stones. It's spelled the same way, which is very unusual. So I don't know that ancestor, but it's there nevertheless. The last thing I will say is, quite honestly, I feel like I've left a piece of me there rather than taken anything from it. And it's a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of my life. And a lot of hours just crawling over the stones like an ant. But I don't feel it would have been right for me to take anything except my experience of being there and ours.
And if anybody would like to have a look, we bought the original, Mark's original silver point So please do come and have a little look at it. It's on the board that was on his lap in our office.
Oh, well, are we allowed to be photographed with Mark? Well, thank you all very much. Susan, did you want to make?
I was just going to mention the naked ladies. I think there's a photograph of them in Julian Richards' book, A History of Stonehenge in Photographs. You might want to check that one. I think it's about that date. And just to say, I'm sorry that I missed out in a previous museum partnership scheme. I didn't know about that one. I think if I'd listed all the previous schemes at Stonehenge, you'd still be listening to me tomorrow morning. So just suffice to say, there's been many, many schemes, and many, many people have dedicated life work to trying to get one of those schemes or many of those schemes off the ground. So really, it's I guess it would be quite nice to dedicate the visitor centre to all those people who worked on various versions of the project but never actually saw it until today. And those people who have worked and won't ever see the visitor centre because they're long gone. So yeah, it's one of those places that will be in many people's memories for lots and lots of different reasons, whether they just come as a visitor with a camera for the day or whether they've worked on projects for 30, 40 years.
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, the Society is very honoured and privileged to be contributing to the first exhibition, the first temporary exhibition there. And you know, the things that we've got, both antiquarian material and material from the last century and a bit, some of the first aerial photographs of any site in our collection, down to the Paul Copronico photograph of Stonehenge, a leading American photographer, which was given to us through the good offices of the Yale Centre for British Art just a couple of years ago at the time of the exhibition. So our interest is passionate and ongoing. Thank you very much for your talks tonight.